It is always good to be together, something that we appreciate all the more given the experience of the pandemic, which has kept us apart. My warmest welcome to my brother, Metropolitan Nathaniel, and all those in his community who have joined us tonight. And there is the happy coincidence that today, this very day, Pope Francis sent a message to His Holiness Bartholomew on the occasion of his 30th anniversary, which I now read. Dearest brother in Christ, on the joyful occasion of the 30th anniversary of your election as the Archbishop of Constantinople and Ecumenical Patriarch, I express my fervent best wishes. Chronia Pola, ad multos annos. I join you in thanksgiving to the Lord for the many blessings bestowed upon you and your life and ministry over these years, and pray that God, from whom all gifts come, will grant you health, spiritual joy, and abundant grace to sustain every aspect of your lofty service. It is with gratitude to God that I reflect on our own profound personal bond from the time of the inauguration of my papal ministry, when you honored me with your presence in Rome. Over time, this bond has become a fraternal friendship, nurtured in many meetings, not only in Rome, but also in Phanar, Jerusalem, Assisi, Cairo, Lesbos, Bari, and Budapest. As clearly reflected once again by your participation in events recently held in Rome, where your presence was most appreciated. I share with you the understanding of our common pastoral responsibility in the face of the urgent challenges confronting the entire human family today. In particular, I assure you of my appreciation for your commitment to safeguarding creation and for your reflection on this issue, from which I have learned and continue to learn much. With the outbreak of the pandemic and the ensuing grave health, social, and economic repercussions, your testimony and teaching on the need for the spiritual conversion of humanity have acquired enduring relevance. Moreover, I sincerely thank you for ceaselessly indicating the way of dialogue in charity and in truth as the only possible way for reconciliation between believers in Christ and for the reestablishment of their full communion. With God's help, this is the path along which we will most certainly continue to walk together, for the closeness and solidarity between our churches are an indispensable contribution to universal brotherhood and social justice, of which humanity is so urgently in need. With sentiments of deep fraternal affection, I exchange with your all holiness a holy embrace in the love of Christ the Lord, given in Rome from St. John Lateran on the 22nd of October, 2021, signed Francis. I echo the same sentiments as I greet you in your community tonight. I join you in thanksgiving to the Lord for the many blessings bestowed upon your life and ministry. This evening, we highlight the importance of harmony and mutual encouragement among religious leaders and the scientific community as it relates to combating our current ecological crisis. We take our inspiration from St. Paul, who implores his fellow Christians in Rome to live in perfect harmony with one another. He particularly urges them to be patient with and encourage each other. Nearly 2,000 years later, the Greek Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches honor this good counsel by our commitment to gather together as Christian brothers and sisters every year to join hands and hearts in the common cause to care for God's wondrous creation and at the same time give witness to our belief in the interconnectedness of all that God has made. As important as our local efforts are, we continue to be impacted by the witness and the leadership of Pope Francis and Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew for creation care. For example, on October 4th of this year, the feast of St. Francis, the Ecumenical Patriarch and Pope Francis joined other Christian and religious leaders of the Vatican to encourage each other as people of faith committed to addressing the climate crisis we now face. Each spoke out of the respective riches of his or her own religious tradition, and all arrived at a similar conclusion. We must speak together as religious leaders about the perils of climate change, particularly about its impact on the most vulnerable among us. These are the words of Pope Francis on that occasion. Recognizing that the world is interconnected means not only realizing the harmful effects of our actions, but also identifying behaviors and solutions to be adopted, and an attitude of openness to interdependence and sharing. We cannot act alone, for each of us is fundamentally responsible to care for others and for the environment. This commitment should lead to an urgently needed change of direction, nurtured also by our respective religious beliefs and spirituality. That gathering, like our ecumenical gathering tonight, should impress upon all of us that the time for acting alone to address climate change is no longer an option. We should and must work together. Let me highlight 3 insights offered in our readings tonight and echoed by recent statements of our religious leaders. The first is an appreciation of the spiritual understanding of the interconnectedness of all, central themes at the interreligious gatherings on October the 4th in Laudato Si and in the creation account from Genesis that we have just heard tonight. In the very first lines of the Bible, we hear the refrain, "And God saw that it was good," which is repeated throughout the first chapter of Genesis. Waters, land, creatures, plants, an interconnected matrix of creation willed by God, all created before we human beings were created. As Pope Francis underscored in remarks on the October 4th gathering, the interconnectedness of our world has a deeply spiritual meaning for us. We recognize the signs of divine harmony present in the natural world, for no creature is self-sufficient. We all exist only in dependence on each other, complementing one another in the service of one another. It is this recognition that gives Christian spirituality the passion to care for and protect the world and all humans, and impels us to reconcile our personal values with our everyday practices. As such, Christian spirituality ignites personal and social love because it favors sobriety and humility at a personal level while increasing the capacity for living together in communion, moving from indifference to loving awareness and from individualism to solidarity. For our spirituality to be authentically Christian, it must be radical and equal to the radical changes that we must make to save human society and our common home. It must be a radical spirituality that is unafraid to speak of the need for sacrifice as a vital element that must occupy a central role in the transition to a sustainable planet with a just economy. You know, too often, sacrifice is a topic that we'd like to avoid, of how to meet this ecological crisis. Some people fear that if we call people to make personal sacrifices to promote an equitable economy, it will make it more difficult to form a consensus supporting climate justice, or such a call will be distorted by climate deniers to make the pathway to sustainability seem impossible. But the world's great religions and ethical traditions know the value of sacrifice, and we can do a great service to humanity by recovering these traditions. It might seem that a society such as ours has lost its capacity for sustained sacrifice, or at least lost sight of the ennobling role that sacrifice can play in our individual and our communal lives. But if we look more deeply, we find in the enormous sacrifices that families make for their children a proclamation that sustained sacrifice is in fact all around us. This is the linchpin for building a public ethic of sacrifice in pursuit of a justice and sustainable world. Pope Francis devotes tremendous attention in Laudato Si to the ethic of intergenerational responsibility, which is ultimately rooted in the spirituality of sacrifice for those who will inherit the planet. We must be willing to publicly advance such an ethic, not as a position we grudgingly acknowledge the need for, but as the great moral call of our age. A second theme to consider is the value of collaborative dialogue among religious leaders and scientific experts. As we heard in the first reading, St. Paul insisted that the Christians of Rome live in harmony, mutually supporting and encouraging one another. His admonition compels us to do likewise. Reading the signs of our current times, it is vital that we integrate not only our shared spiritual wisdom in seeking the harmony we require to address climate change, but the knowledge of the scientific community as well. We must resist pitting scientific truth against religious truth, as some seem to do today. One obvious example is the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and the amazing advances for the scientific community in developing effective vaccines for the pandemic. Tonight, we also need to highlight the overwhelming consensus of the scientific community that we have arrived at a moment of climate crisis that needs our immediate attention if we want to harbor any hope of averting this crisis for present and future generations. I look forward to hearing the insights of tonight's speaker, Doug Farr, whose architectural work implies scientific advances to lessen the impact of ecological concerns. And a final theme to ponder is a need to understand the imperative of addressing climate change as it relates to our preferential option for people who are poor. Recall the first line of Psalm 41, which appeared near the outset of our Vespers tonight. Happy the man who considers the poor and the weak. The Lord will save him in the day of evil, will guard him and give him life. The psalmist here reminds us that those who have been gifted with resources and means have the duty to address the needs of people who are poor and the vulnerable in our midst. Earlier, I noted that we should recover the insights of the world's great religions and ethical traditions that call us to individual and social sacrifice to save our planet. Those same spiritual and moral traditions are equally united in demanding that the marginalized must not bear heavy burdens in moving to planetary sustainability. Catholic social teaching identifies this concern as a preferential option for people who are poor. In this first of its kind joint statement, Pope Francis, Archbishop of Canterbury Justin Welby, and Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew encourage Christians to pray that the world leaders at the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Glasgow make courageous choices which would benefit those most impacted by climate change, namely poor people. This is their message. We call on everyone, whatever their belief or worldview, to endeavor to listen to the cry of the earth and of people who are poor, examining their belief, their behavior, and pledging meaningful sacrifices for the sake of the earth which God has given to us. The statement also makes clear that those most impacted by the devastating effects of climate change are those least at fault for it. It therefore calls on wealthy nations to take responsibility for their actions out of a sense of justice and make the requisite changes needed to heed the cries of people who are poor. Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, Pope Francis, and other religious leaders have been clear about the interconnected nature and the complexity of the challenges that we face and the need to address them in unity, ever mindful that it is in God that we trust. It is up to us to put aside any false idols and continually respond to the call to take up the mission of promoting a more just, equitable, and loving future. Let us be reminded that the mission to care for each other and for the earth belongs to each and every one of us. Let our faith ignite us to take bold action, grateful for the contributions of science and undaunted to make the sacrifices required to save the planet. Let us not be discouraged by the work ahead. Instead, let us trust and rejoice in God's promise to make all things new, and to take to heart the encouragement the Holy Father offers when he tells us that in spite of the practical relativism and consumer culture that we live in, all is not lost. Human beings, he notes, while capable of the worst, are also capable of rising above themselves and their mental and social conditioning, choosing again what is good and making a new start. No system can completely suppress our openness to what is good, what is true, what is beautiful, or our God-given ability to respond to his grace at work deep in our hearts. I appeal to my brothers and sisters throughout the world not to forget this dignity which is ours.